morning. Thank you all for being here. From Intel's perspective, this event is something new for us, as you heard. We're out here trying to figure out, okay, we're talking to thousands of companies around the world, and we're seeing a bunch of, you heard from Andrew, digital disruption happening in those countries, in those companies. I have the ability to engage with our team around the world with all those kinds of companies, and what we're trying to figure out is, what are the things that they have in common? When you see disruption, what are some of the things that these folks really kind of latch onto? From our company's perspective, we're developing products, technologies, that sort of thing, and we're doing, I believe, a really good job of kind of sensing the market. But like you heard from Andrew, and you guys all are going to get his, you're all going to get his book now. I think you all registered for that. Like you heard from him, those changes are causing huge disruptions in business models for those companies. We engage with a lot of them, and I can tell you there is sort of two schools of thought. The one, we're seeing some of the examples on the consumer side where people are being the disruptors, and they're doing a great job going in, grabbing share, changing markets. The other ones are being disrupted. And I can tell you from my side and from my team, we worked with a lot of you. I've been coming to New York, engaging with a lot of the financial services firms for a couple decades. And it's been great to come here because you guys are passionate users of technology. I used to get great feedback on, boy, I wish the product had more cores and more cache size and frequency. We don't hear that much anymore in the way that we engage. A lot of our engagements now are thinking about process, thinking about business models, thinking about the way that your companies are going to evolve. So we're spending a lot more time talking to those Fortune 2000 customers about, how in some cases they become a little more aggressive, a little more nimble, and able to adapt to some of the changes that are going on around us. One thing is constant: the change that's happening, the digital disruption that's happening, is happening across the world. And from our side, we like to try and find some examples. So we'll talk, one of the questions was around some of the startup environment. And we saw that article that was printed about Silicon Valley, and are we really going to see this startup culture kind of continue to be pervasive? Are there going to be 5 big companies, like Andrew said, that are really going to kind of be the sort of the captors of the innovators, if you will? And we see a bunch of innovation still happening on the edge. I'll bring up one of those companies a little bit later in a panel to talk about it. But we also see another thing. We see big companies, we see established companies innovating themselves and creating new business models out of necessity in a lot of cases. So I think it'll be an interesting balance. What I do is I go in with our team and we try and find the things that they have in common, that disruptive companies have in common, because the reality is we don't sell much directly to an end user community today. Our company goes in, we have thousands of people around the world that talk to those companies, but the reality is you buy through an ecosystem of HP, Dell, Cisco, increasingly Amazon and Microsoft and Google, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, a number of those cloud services companies. So we're trying to go in there and saying, okay, when people are engaging, when I'm talking to an energy company or transportation company, what are they doing that they have in common? And one of the things we're trying to figure out is, how can we tell the stories of the business model transformation so that others can kind of tag along on some of those changes? We believe the shift is inevitable for some of these companies to either survive or not, and we don't think fate is determined in a lot of these ways. So for us, we see a lot of it in our consumer life, and I had one of the conversations we were having as we were preparing for this that gave me real pause was, people talked about I see Airbnb, I see the Uber. Andrew mentioned a bunch of those sort of consumer examples, and I'll talk a little bit about it in my personal life. But we see those examples as consumers. Where's my example when I want to change my factory automation? Right? I need that domain expertise. I need to understand what the process changes are. And so those sorts of models aren't readily known and readily shared. Obviously, it's IP for many of the companies. They view it as their secret sauce, right? So we're in there engaging with a lot of them, trying to innovate and figure out what those really good nuggets are. From our own personal lives, I travel a lot, as I'm sure all of you all do. I am based in Portland, Oregon. So we have a couple of examples. I have a couple examples I'll give you about my life and kind of the way that I engage. And one of the guys back there that you'll hear from, Dan from Citibank, he was actually talking about cars. He's a big car guy. I like cars. We have a car, my wife and I, my 2 daughters, we all have cars. But increasingly, as I'm on the road, I'm finding myself thinking of transportation as a service more than I am about my vehicle. So I'm sitting there, and we were having the conversation. He actually is really good at souping up cars and modifying the computer chips and all that stuff. And from our company's perspective, we love any computer chip in a car, so that's good. But we love to see, I like to see also innovation happening in the vehicles where they're starting to put features and capability in that aren't just for, I believe, a driver of today. I had the ability to go visit the Tesla factory down in California. Those guys are doing some just awesome stuff, but a lot of it is to make driving simpler for a person driving the vehicle today, and ultimately to the point where you don't need a person driving the vehicle and navigating that transition, which I just find, fascinating. A couple of things that, for me personally, I interact with. So I fly a lot to different places, and obviously I could pack my clothes, take my clothes, that sort of thing. There are now services where my clothes can be sent to a place. That place cleans my clothes, puts them in inventory, puts them on my app, and I can click, I want these clothes going to that hotel, and they will send them there for me. Clothes as a service. You think about your entire life as a service, clothes, okay. Uber, Lyft, Didi, all the transportation stuff that we all know, right, as a service. That one's pretty easy to figure out. So now I got clothes, I got transportation. We're seeing things like Airbnb. Everybody knows now, obviously, housing as a service. My position, I recently took another spot within our sales organization. My position now requires me to be in largely 10 different countries that are not the U.S. and China. I live in the U.S., so this is going to be pretty complicated for all the travel that I have to do, and I've got to spend, probably a month at a time, a couple weeks at a time in that location. Having lodging as a service is a huge, advantage for somebody like me. And my wife and I, we were talking about, I have 2 young daughters, youngish, 16 and 18, so 2 teenage daughters. And, once our youngest is out of school, she's a junior in high school, the thought that we could potentially sell our house and then travel the globe 1 month here, 1 month there kind of thing is now very real given some of the consumer services that we're seeing. In Portland, there's another interesting thing we're doing. Portland's kind of weird. Portland, Oregon, a little bit of a weird place. They say keep Portland weird as the theme of Portland. But they replaced all the parking meters that they had with smart parking meters. No more coin-operated parking meters in Oregon. The other thing they did is they allowed you to connect your smartphone to those meters, and they have an app called Parking Kitty. How many of you have heard of Parking Kitty? Anybody? We have one power user of Parking Kitty in the back. It's Lisa Spellman. You saw her on stage a little earlier. It actually is an app that'll give you a little bit of a warning when you've plugged the meter and you're running out of time. And it actually will meow at you, apparently, is what I've been told. So so you think about just the as-a-service capabilities that exist, and you think about something like Parking Kitty, it would have been, unfathomable years ago. And for us at Intel, we're looking at it and we're like, great, technology in a place where previously there wasn't technology. I now have computer chips and a meter. Maybe we win it, maybe we don't. That meter communicates over a 4G or 3G infrastructure. So there's communication technology there. There's a database backend, cloud-based backend infrastructure. So to handle all of the app transactions, you now have your phone. You just think about the exciting world that we live in and I think like Andrew talked through, may you live in interesting times. It also probably doesn't hurt. Parking Kitty launched in Oregon, and it happens to be, according to a study, the #1 location for cat ladies in the US. Interesting little fact, I thought. One of the things that we're looking at is what's going to happen to a lot of the businesses that are out there. When we see some of the stats, and you guys are case proof of this, half of the companies in the S&P 500 won't be around in 10 years in some way, shape, or form. That's pretty shocking if you think about the types of companies that are in there, and that pace is only accelerating. We've seen, a couple decades ago, that number was like, 20 years to turn over, the S&P 500, half of the S&P 500. Now it's down to 10, right? Pretty incredible. You think about the top 20 companies in every industry, names in financial services, energy, retail, health and life science, transportation, manufacturing. You think of the top 20 companies in there, 40% of them are going to be majorly disrupted over the next decade. So just incredible things going on there. And then as a father of a couple teenage daughters and as a manager of a lot of people at our company, we're seeing, half of the sales force and half of our employee base are going to be millennials by 2020. They interact differently. They work differently. We need to have different sets of tools and capabilities for them, and we've retooled our entire office environment, productivity environment. We've retooled a lot of what we do to take advantage of some of the creativity that this new generation of workers have. So it's an incredible time, we believe, to be alive. The question that somebody asked, I believe it was the last question for Andrew, was a really interesting one. What's going to happen when I get all this automation, right? And some of the things that we're seeing from a study perspective, 150 million of the knowledge worker jobs will be replaced by 2025. Now, some of them are brand new. Positions that are coming in, like we all think of white-collar jobs right now as knowledge worker, and then you think of blue-collar jobs, everybody's like robots replacing somebody on an assembly line, right? We're really talking about the white-collar jobs here. And you're hearing about machines learning from machines now, taking advantage of, algorithmic learning, and the Go example was, I thought, a very good one. This is the least amount of change that we're going to see. I've had a lot of, conversation internally with our folks, and everybody's like, when is the pace going to slow down, and that sort of thing. And we're changing ourselves as a company. Part of the reason we wanted to do an event like this is because everybody's got Intel, the PC company, right? A lot of opinions about what we do there. And we wanted to share a lot more about what we're doing to engage industry. So that'll be pretty important as we go through the day. When we talk to companies around the world, we kind of see examples of where, they're kind of grabbing nuggets and being successful. One of them, the 6 sort of characteristics for becoming a real successful digital business is data. There are no shortage of examples of where companies now are starting not to think about the widget that they produce and the raw material required to produce that widget, but they're thinking about a services model off of that. They're thinking about, how do I get a better relationship with the end user of the technology? And you do that through better use of data. The world is becoming smarter. Everything is becoming connected. So that'll be one of the things that we see moving forward. The parking meter example is one thing, but we're seeing it across all sorts of different industries, from oil and gas field management, manufacturing environments, et cetera. So huge change in terms of the way that devices are getting connected. We run some pretty large factories. I've had the ability to talk to some of the people that do all of our sort of IoT deployments in those factories. And as advanced as we think we are as a company, or we think things are in terms of technology, we're in very early days, and they come to us all the time and say, this isn't working for me, and here's why. Here are some capabilities that I need around next gen, 5G capability, and here's what I need out of that. The world is on demand. I click the app, I want the answer. I do the search, I want the response. And in a business environment, some of those things that we used to take advantage of in terms of process changes and be able to roll projects out over a year and that sort of thing is now being replaced by some of the disruptors that are coming in with as-a-service offerings. And you'll hear a little bit about that in one of our future speakers. Lisa Davis will come up. Security and trust, are really big. And what we're seeing is we, Silicon Technology Company, lo and behold, think about the capabilities we build into the CPUs or the platforms, but increasingly we're partnering with people that bring those solutions to market, put them in the software, and we start to, a lot of people talk about the breaches and that sort of thing, and they're certainly very real, but what we're trying to get to is the area where we can bake security into what we do, not brush it on, as Lisa likes to say. So it's a great time for us to try and figure out, okay, how do we relook at some of the things that we do on the platform level, all the way down to the hardware and the root of trust associated with that. A connected experience. Your phones aren't very good without connectivity, but the same is true for factory equipment. The same is going to be true for autonomously driving vehicles. And lastly, an innovative workforce. I talked a little bit about millennials and being able to adapt and respond. I go around the world and I see all kinds of different, ways that different folks are engaging their workforces to create innovative opportunities. So we believe that you're going to need that environment. Everybody used to be the work from home, right? That was one of the things and then it was, I work from Starbucks or we got to figure out a way to securely allow millennials and others to innovate in a variety of different places, because a lot of the innovation now won't necessarily just happen in an office space by a group of software developers. That's certainly one, but you're going to see it in, the manufacturing floor. You're going to see it in lots of different environments. We need a way to make sure that innovation keeps happening. Let me give you a couple examples of customers that I talked to. So in the energy space, there's been, a lot of innovation. And normally, I think of the energy space, and I think of, power generation, power distribution, last mile, sort of energy. And one of the companies we started to engage with was the leading producer in Tokyo of energy there. And we started to develop a more of a deeper relationship with them. And this really helped us as a company because we learned, the Tokyo energy market is being deregulated, similar to what happened here. And they used to be, think about it as 10 prefectures in Tokyo, and they were monopolistic. If you had prefecture number 2, you had generation, distribution, last mile. You could sell electricity into that prefecture only, and you couldn't sell anywhere else. Couldn't distribute anywhere else. Couldn't have a relationship with energy customers outside of your prefecture. They deregulated it, allowed it to get mixed up. And now what's happening, given that mix and match, is you're starting to see competition. So a bunch of them, the innovators, kind of came to us and said, hey, help us understand what happened in Europe, in the US. Who were the winners and who were the losers, and what were their business models? And how did they survive and thrive? So we started talking about some of the things that we learned, about what some of those folks did. But then they also said, we're going to compete or partner in a new world. They went from, it was about a year and a half ago, they went from 10 people selling energy to an end user to 414 and counting people providing energy in a retail relationship with the end user. You could now package your energy bill up with a travel agency in Japan. So there's all kinds of bundles and package offerings. And the real innovation wasn't necessarily, I changed the way I produce energy or I changed the way I distribute it. A lot of the innovation right now in Japan is happening on the retail relationship with the end user, which is then causing them, they had to shut down 26 out of their 30 nuclear reactors after the Fukushima disaster. So it really caused them to kind of think, where am I going to place my dollars and my bets on innovation? And they're modernizing their grid now because they're starting to see opportunities potentially to regulate the load at the end user level. They're building relationships with those end users. So it's just a very interesting shift that's happening in the Japanese market around energy. From our perspective, we love getting in there and engaging with them because a lot of the times they're talking about what technology do I employ from a gateway perspective at the end user, communication technology, connectivity, the data center back end. So they're looking at things from an end-to-end perspective now. So it's great for us to be able to engage with them, but we also try and take some of those learnings and say, how can we help other people modernize their power infrastructure? Another example is Suning. They're a big retailer in China. If you haven't heard of them, they have 1,600 stores. So retail, obviously getting transformed in the market. Amazon and others. That's happening, internationally as well. These people own brick and mortar retailer stores. Wow, that's a big industry getting disrupted. So they went in and said, I need to change the relationship I have with an end user. So they're going in and saying, okay, what can I do to use data better? So they started to use AI and machine learning to understand what users were buying, how long they were spending time in their store, traffic patterns. They were doing all kinds of things to optimize sales in their store. But then what they found is that also helped them build a better online business. And they saw over 200% increase in their online traffic and over 100% increase in their traffic in the stores and in their sales in the stores, simply by using data better. These are the types of examples that we love to see as a company because we can then gather good information from that and use it potentially elsewhere. So we're seeing it across lots of different industries. Manufacturing industrial is one that we ourselves, big manufacturer, we're looking at how we use technology different in that space. We're seeing it in the transportation realm. So we've made some pretty big bets on autonomously driving vehicles. We're starting to look at how we leverage all the technology that goes into those vehicles. You think about it, and you're going to have, on the basic level, everybody's familiar with the display of the vehicle. You're going to need a control box that controls the steering and the braking. You're going to need visioning around that vehicle so I can tell what's going on. Some of the earlier versions are tracking lanes, kind of level 2 autonomous driving, and you see some of that deployed today. But what you're obviously going to see in the future is I need to read signs. I need to do situational analysis. So you're going to see a lot more capability get built into the vehicle in terms of visioning. You're going to see that compute go inside the vehicle. That thing needs to communicate with a data center backend, mapping software, infrastructure. So we're looking at this transportation holistically as a company. We view ourselves as having ability to provide some expertise then to people that want to get autonomous vehicles on the road quickly. And we can aggregate some of the things that they might not want to do themselves. So we're making a lot of big investments in that space. So the point here is pretty simple. We want to understand everything that you guys are going through from a transformation perspective. We know there's a lot of disruption out there. And you all have communicated pretty clearly to us that technology is a key foundational part of that. So what I want to do next is bring a couple of folks on stage as we think about how do we thrive in markets of tomorrow, right, from where we are today, and how do we look at some of the innovators that have done some things about it. So I'm going to welcome Michelle Bacharach from FindMine and Dan Maslowski from Citibank to the stage.
Thank you.
Hey, good to see you again.
Thanks.
Good to see you. All right, so throughout the morning, right, you heard, Andrew talk a lot about digital disruption, kind of gave an example of some of the, different models and stuff that he's seeing, right? And we talked about machine learning and AI, talked about a variety of different topics. A lot of people know Citibank, so we'll ask Michelle maybe a little bit about FindMine, just a little bit about the company, what you guys do.
Yeah, we're certainly of a different scale. So we're a 10-person company. We're a seed stage startup, raised just under $2 million. So we really just have gotten started. And hopefully are one of those companies you think about when you talk about people disrupting industries. And I like to think of disrupting not necessarily as like stealing revenue from an incumbent industry, but significant change in the way people work. And so what FindMine does is we apply machine learning to the retail industry and try to make some of those like manual and tedious tasks that retailers are doing easier using machine learning. Because we're a startup, we kind of had to laser focus, and the very first place we chose to start was around outfitting for fashion retailers. So there's teams and teams of people in fashion retailers putting together outfits by hand. Things go out of stock, the world changes, and then those outfits are no longer useful. And so they're continuing to do it as fast as they can, but it can only get through about 5 to 10% of their product catalog. Meanwhile, shoppers like you and I will buy up to 170% more when we see the whole outfit, so there's a lot of money on the table, and that's the gap that we're trying to close just by helping make the retailer a little bit more efficient in creating these outfits using machine learning.
So you work with the large retailers, not directly with the end user.
Correct.
Yeah. So as you deployed your technology, you obviously have to startup mode, right? 10, a little different than our companies, right? As you deployed your technology, you came up with okay, this is the problem that I think people are having. How did you kind of go through, brainstorm some of the things of, okay, we have a chance to do something new here. What's the new thing you came up with? And maybe, did you toy with the process and business model? Because a lot of folks, it wasn't just the technology, right, aspect of it, AI and machine learning, but it's, I'm going to change processes for some of these big companies. And how did you arrive where you are today?
Yeah, that's a really good question because initially, so I started this company, or I have a passion for this because I have this problem as a consumer. I don't have that style gene where I can see, a cool jacket and be like, oh, I know 10 ways to wear that. I needed the help, and I think a lot of people need that help.
Not me.
You look like you're doing great.
That was your luck. They sell this in a kit, it comes like, it just
Exactly.
comes together.
Yeah, it's so much easier that way, right? So
That's right.
Suit is a service, right?
It's way
Suit as a
easier this
service.
way, yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to figure out what's like the path of least resistance. We were talking about friction yesterday. How do you eliminate friction from a person who needs some clothing to wearing that clothing successfully in their life, and creating the outfit was that catalyst. But we toyed with a bunch of different processes. So we thought about going directly to consumer. But then going directly to the consumer, you have to understand a whole bunch of attributes about them, about what they have in their closet already, about their style point of view. And that added back too much friction. So we said, okay, that's off the table. What's another process where we can change things? And so we started looking at what the retailers were doing internally and how they were creating outfits, and like the mannequin and the window display and the creative team that's putting together campaigns and the merchandisers who are creating outfits online. And we said, okay, if we apply machine learning there, we can actually take a bunch of friction out without reintroducing it in a different place. And so that was where we got tipped off that was like the right approach to pursue. And then we just had to figure out how to do it. And that's where we had to use a bunch of machine learning to make it work so that we weren't inheriting all the friction internally as a 10-person company, because with, we have $5 billion brands that we work with, and across, tens and hundreds of thousands of products and hundreds of millions of outfits, we're not going to be able to inherit that friction manually, so we had to put technology into the system to automate it.
Yeah, we talked, Dan, about, you run storage and infrastructure for Citi. We talked about that idea of friction, kind of as we were going through here. As you think about the technology and the process, right, are there things that are, similar from what you guys are going through on your side?
Well, absolutely. So we're actually doing the same thing. We're removing friction from the ecosystem.
Citibank fashion?
I hadn't thought about that, but maybe that's what I'll bring to my book of work next year. Yeah, we're about removing friction. We have slightly different scale, tens of thousands of nodes, right? 200-year-old company with a lot of process, a lot of ways that we do things, a lot of regulatory oversight. But we still are trying to solve the same fundamental problems. How do we get our services to our customers faster? And so when we look at what you're doing and we compare it to what we're doing, which is essentially the same thing, we're going to as a service, we're trying to modernize, we're trying to be more agile, we're trying to decompose the elements of the life cycle of the business and move it into an area that is solved through automation, through rich AI, analytics associated with data, those kinds of activities. Again, we're not really in a different business. We're just at different scales and maybe at different ends of the value chain. You're helping, if you were to help us, you'd be helping us looking at our process and the way we're doing things and making suggestions for us. So again, very similar kinds of activities.
We talked earlier about infrastructure, and you guys, you obviously have huge regulatory requirements. You have tremendous, sort of things that you need to be considering every time you deploy the technology.
Absolutely.
And when we talked about as a service a little bit, Michelle, kind of referenced her service from a API as a service call kind of thing during some of the conversation. Can you talk about what you've done to modify your infrastructure over the last couple of years to get yourself more nimble so that you're in a better position to deliver things reactively, quickly,
Absolutely. I could spend probably 2, maybe 4 hours talking about that. Let me just decompose a little bit of what we're doing. So storage is a huge portion of my portfolio. It's actually where I started. It's what I'm really most comfortable with. We've actually decomposed a storage array. We've reduced it to APIs. We've reduced it to best-in-class commodity components. We have made it a software as a service stack. So what we've tried to do is isolate the software from the hardware. Now, you can't totally do that, but we've standardized our hardware across every single data center, and then we put the value chain into the software stack. And so, storage as a service. Additionally, we've moved into cloud and hybrid cloud. We've done a tremendous amount of work of looking at traditional workloads and seeing if we can shift them into cloud-like based workloads. I have a rule. So we built the cloud at Citi in many respects, and you're not allowed to bring your old junk to the cloud, right? So you have to look at becoming cloud-enabled. You can't be a cloud Neanderthal, to quote somebody else. So we're spending a lot of time not only in changing the underlying infrastructure, but changing how you consume the underlying infrastructure.
Yeah. You have a service that you offer. Obviously, you got now 10 people, so you're growing. But that service needs to be scalable. Ultimately, when you bring on the next big retailer, right, I've got to have the ability to scale it. You scale it through a cloud-based architecture. Can you talk a little bit about what you guys do there?
Yeah, so startup growth is like a step function, right? So for a while it was just the two of us. We were on Rackspace, we paid $100, I'm not even kidding, a month in hosting costs. And it was literally just to power our landing page. It was Find Mine's coming, sign up, and had no information about what we did or anything. Then we kind of figured out, okay, we have this what they call product market fit, where you find the problem and the solution that makes sense and someone's willing to pay you something for it. Although at the very beginning, we didn't get paid for it. We just got someone to say, yeah, sure, I have a Shopify store. You can put your technology plug-in on my Shopify site and see what happens. And they weren't willing to pay us for it, but we got the data out of it. And that was really the beginning of something. We found that we had something, and we took that and went to our second customer, and we said, hey, what if we could get you, 40% additional average order value? And they were like, yeah, sign us up. And we're like, would you pay us $3,000 for it? And they're like, sure. For a 3-month pilot, great. We got them a 6,000% ROI on that. And we're like, maybe we're pricing this too low. So, then we leveled up another step. So in that kind of step function growth, now, like I said, we're working with billion-dollar brands. Our technology was not built to service billion-dollar brands. Some of the brands that we have actually have products that are so hot that people will send bot traffic to it to try to get the products before they go out of stock. So not only do they have massive organic traffic, they have massive inorganic traffic that, when we first discovered this, completely shut down our entire infrastructure. It ground to a halt. What was great about that was we learned really quickly. We learned about bot filtering and all this stuff, but we were forced to kind of fix this jerry-rigged MVP product that we had built and make it scalable for the future. And so now we're sort of in a position where we're ready for the next 2-3 steps of that step function, and then we'll have to do it again, but you're constantly in this process of reinventing your infrastructure because you can't make that investment prospectively. We're not Citigroup. We can't build for, the next 10 years. We can build for the next 10 months if we're lucky, because we don't have the budget to do anything else. And that's future Michelle's problem. She'll deal with that when she gets there.
That's after you get the huge IPO and the whole deal, right?
Sure.
So we talked a little bit about retail, the changes going on in retail and just kind of e-commerce in general, right? We're just seeing different relationships being developed with the end user. And also we're just seeing huge disruption in a lot of the brick and mortar retailers that we talk to. So as you guys have a retail presence, you guys have obviously huge back-end infrastructure that needs to be modified to be more agile. How is that is that impacting decisions that you guys make about the way that you deploy technology, both now to satisfy current demand, but also in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. And I always want to go right after you because you give me such great ideas and great ways of framing things. You mentioned your first customer and you got the data, but no compensation. Mm-hmm. Well, that's another way of saying the value's in the data, right? There's tremendous unharnessed business potential in our data infrastructure. And so as we look at new ways to compete, as we look at new markets, as we look at new opportunities for Citi, we're looking at our data, and we have tremendous quantities of data. And figuring out how to analyze that data, figuring out how to change our business models predicated on that data, customer and buying behavior, fraud detection, rich analytics for positioning of customers, as well as reaching out to them. These are all critical aspects of what we're trying to do, and that drives our underlying infrastructure design. To quote somebody else, just because I built it doesn't mean they're going to come use it. It actually has to bring business value to the folks that are out there trying to drive our business. So we're doing a lot of interaction, a lot of nimble kind of activity. And similar to you, my budget might be slightly different than yours, but I had to tell people, take a risk on me, right? Try the first 90 days of this product as a service. If it doesn't work out for you, there's no cost to you. If it does work out for you, I'm going to ask you to move wholesale to it. So we've done a lot of that sort of getting our first customers, because change is hard, especially at a company the size of Citi. Shifting that perception of what's valuable is hard. A lot of folks are very comfortable with the way we used to do it, and we have to convince them that this is a better way, and it actually brings business value to them. So again, very similar, and I like following you, and it's awesome.
How much of there's a lot of discussion in industry right now about the, IT and the evolution of IT and kind of where things are going there. And then line of business making a lot more decisions, being involved a lot more in the business. And obviously it's a partnership. Everybody's kind of figured that out. It's evolved over the last 5 or 10 years to more of a decision making and implementation sort of partnership. How are you guys seeing that on your side? Like, you come from the IT side, you and I talked a little bit about background kind of thing, but certainly you're dealing with line of business on a daily basis. So how's that going?
So we're doing a lot of transition and a lot of pivoting. First thing is that on the traditional IT side, we're bringing in deep engineering talent, folks that have patents in the industry, people that have actually been on the build side and now have shifted into the buy side. But we're bringing that build expertise into our ecosystem. On top of that, we're actually partnering up with our customers, and it's not a monolithic shop whereby we provide up the services and then we walk away. We actually spend a lot of time working directly with the customer. I spoke a little bit about how they have to transition their portfolio to actually live in the cloud. We actually partner up with them, and we join their areas of business, if you will, and show them how to do it. We propose new ideas, new methodologies. We point to some of the startup companies out there, and we suggest that they adopt those sort of agile, continuous integration, continuous deployment. You said, there's a problem out there that's 10 months away, and I do the same thing, right? And so do our businesses, right? We can't solve everything. You mentioned MVP, minimum viable product. We do that constantly at Citi, just at a different scale.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you talked a little bit earlier about, when we were prepping, just about the being good enough from a technology perspective, and then thinking about what the next offering is. So what's next for Find Mine, right? And how did you view that whole get to the AI, ML good enough solution as opposed to the PhD academic perfect, kind of concept?
Yeah, so in terms of what's next, rebuilding kind of the infrastructure for the next level of scale is a big one. We are adding continuous integration to continuous deployment. We have like a modularized build system as well. We're investing a lot in the API. So initially we had this kind of like JavaScript snippet you could put on a website. But FindMine's core value proposition is that we can take this like outfitting thing off your plate or help scale your brand's point of view across all your different channels, not just e-commerce. So we're doing this in store. We have experiments running with like a chat bot on Facebook Messenger. So our content engine that creates these, curated on-brand, in-stock, kind of in-season outfits can be plugged into anything through the API, but you constantly have to be reinforcing those API touch points, have good documentation. That's all really important so you can hand it out to partners and then they can take the ball and run with it. And then on the machine learning front, like one thing that we learned was like the path of least resistance for a startup is the only way you can go. Just by sheer lack of resources, you don't have the luxury of doing it any other way. So like we have one data scientist and she's great and she's like probably as productive as 5 data scientists, but still she's one person. And so when we were looking at doing some like classification for products, so a lot of what we do in the machine learning we do is actually not in the creating of outfits, it's in understanding what these products are. Mm-hmm. And that's a means to an end, that's not the end in itself. So we're doing this classification and like, support vector machines is like this kind of super sexy right now type of machine learning. And so that's kind of where she started, and it was maybe like 65% accurate, something like that. So it wasn't quite enough, and it was going to take a lot of investment to make it more accurate. And so she's like, okay, well, maybe let me go back to my just super straightforward, like natural language processing kind of toolkit, and there's this model called Bag of Words, which basically looks at a bunch of words and figures out how to classify them. And it's kind of very straightforward stuff that is not the sexy place of machine learning, but it got like 95% accuracy. And so she was like, great, good enough, this is done, move the ticket to complete, and we moved on.
Yeah.
But circling back to some of the more deep learning technologies, that kind of thing is part of our roadmap, but we'll get there only when we need to go there.
Yeah, it's interesting, the concept for a lot of us, right? I mean, in commerce examples, in consumer examples, and other things like that, there's an element of I get something good enough, I can cut, run, and go with a product. And then on the other side, you're dealing with money,
Yep.
right? When we get to autonomous vehicles, we're dealing with safety, right, and human lives. And so there's going to be a lot of things where, we got to decide that the good enough isn't good enough, right? What's the true level and the bar? Love working with innovative companies like yourselves. So thank you both very much for coming up. Appreciate it.
Great pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, as we see these shifts going on, from our perspective as a company, we're trying to make ourselves better. We're taking a lot of what we learn and we're feeding it back into our business units that are creating the next generation products, building more security into the products, more performance, more capability and scalability into every one of those. So it's incredibly important for us that we get the feedback. That's why we love hearing from innovative companies and also coming here and getting a lot of great feedback from folks like yourself.